Welcome to the Comic Watchers, episode 282. I'm Chad. Matt is taking the night off. Tonight, we are talking with Mark Wheatley, who is re-releasing his the collected edition of Breathtakers through Titan Comics.
That's
Hello,
right.
Mark.
How do you do, sir?
Yeah, good. How about yourself?
I am doing great. It's good to be here and to be talking about Breathtaker again after 35 years.
Wow. Yeah,
Actually, we were talking about it more recently than that, but the first one came out 35 years ago.
So before we get into talking about Breathtaker, tell us a little bit about yourself, both as a comic book reader and as a creator.
Okay. Oh, the comic book reader. Well, let's see. I was just reading up on Steve Ditko. Actually, Steve Ditko probably was the first artist that I recognized and sucked me into comics on Spider-Man. And when I did the Black Hood, I was very conscious of trying to introduce a villain every single issue, the same way Steve had done on the early run of Spider-Man. So yeah, I got into comics reading all the usual stuff. I guess my favorite guys were Ditko and Al Williamson, and those two guys really made quite an impression on me. I know their art styles are quite a distance apart, but I love both of them for different reasons. And I probably somewhat embody those two poles when I draw stuff these days myself. So let's see. Yeah, growing up, I was collecting comics, and my mother was taking them away as fast as I would get them. Um, and one time she took them away, and I said, you know what? I can draw my own. And so it didn't work out too well for her. I've been drawing them ever since.
Yeah. Do you remember maybe the first comic book you read or the one that kind of made you want to read more?
Hmm. Well, actually, I had two random issues of Spider-Man that Ditko had done. And I had no clue that the numbers on them had any sort of sequential information. I just knew I had two copies, and I knew in both stories they were continued. And so I would read them over and over again in different order, trying to figure out how they connected. And I couldn't figure that out. And so I think I became a writer largely because I kept trying to make up a story that would connect these two random issues. And it wasn't for years later that I ran into other comic fans and they said, oh, yeah, you know, those numbers on the cover mean you should read them in this order. It's quite a revelation. So I also had some Disney comics and stories, and they were missing the covers and the first sheet of paper. So the first page and the last page of the comic book, the first two pages and the last two pages of the comic book were missing. And again, I had to kind of figure out the story being dropped into the middle of it. So those four comic books were the only comics I had for years. I didn't know where they came from. I got them from other kids in the neighborhood, so it took a long time. I was, very young and had no clue, but eventually I figured out if you went to a store, you could buy more.
So after you started making your own, what made you think, hey, I want to do this for a living?
Oh, well, I got kind of sucked into fandom, and so the kid I met in junior high school who told me the numbers thing on the covers, he was buying my comics from me for a nickel each, and then I started buying comics from him for like 25 cents. So he was making a deal, and he and I really were the only two comics fans, and we got to talking, and he had a subscription to the Rockets Blast Comic Collector. And that thing was the most amazing thing I'd ever seen in my life. This fanzine that came out every month and sold back issues of comics and original comic art and had fan comic strips in it. It was just very stimulating. And I eventually got my own subscription. And then the two of us started publishing Nucleus, my fanzine. And that was 1969. long time ago. So, and actually, I did 9 issues. I published 9 issues of the fanzine, and I ended up meeting Kelly Freeze, who gave me my first professional art lessons. I connected with John Workman, who contributed to the magazine. I connected with Mark Hempel on the fanzine. Dave Cockrum was one of the guys we worked with on the fanzine. Bob Smith. Um, I published Howard Chaykin's very first comic strip. Um, yeah, so that's it. I just before I knew it, I was in. Uh,
And what would you say your first major writing assignment for, a publisher what it was, or
oh well, that would have been for a company known as Countrywide Publications. They were a really sleazy publisher. They were a magazine mill. They published magazines on every subject: horses, rock and roll, UFOs, Elvis, you name it. They had a magazine to cover it. And I showed up there, recommended by John Workman, who knew people there. And I ended up pitching a magazine to them called Gasm. Because they wanted a science fiction magazine and it had to have sex in it. And so I thought, well, let's just take the or off, and there we have Gatham. And I started doing fully painted comics in this thing, and this was about 6 months before heavy metal hit the stands. And we ended up introducing James O'Barr, John Workman, Mark Hempel, Chuck Dixon, Judith Hunt. A lot of folks got their start in GASM. And I was also illustrating their UFO magazines, and I did comic strips in the back of their rock and roll magazines, and I designed logos for their magazines. And that's pretty much how I got started. Before that, by the way, I had gone to college at Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond, Virginia. And while I was in school, I got a full-time job as the art director for the Department of Agriculture and Commerce. And I
Mhm.
did that for 3 years and then was fed up with drawing pigs and cows, and I moved up to New Jersey and started working out of New York.
Yeah. So let's hop into Breathtaker. It was part of the Vertigo line, am I correct?
Well, when it was originally published, it came out as 4 prestige format books. And that was published under the main title of DC Comics because Vertigo didn't yet exist. But by
Hmm.
the time the book was collected, Vertigo had just been pulled together, and the very first book they released was Breathtaker.
Okay.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit. Give us the over oversight of what the book is about.
The elevator pitch.
All
Um,
right, that's what I usually say, but
uh, there's this girl who's confused and lonely, and she wanders about because she's being tracked by the government. Her mother had been on the run and had raised her on the run, and her mother had odd effect on men. And it turns out that Chase Darrow, her daughter, also had a very strange effect on men when she loved them and they loved her. It's hard not to love her. She would end up sucking the life out of them if she did it too long, if she stayed with them too long. And it turns out that her mother had been developed uh, with powers by the NSA, and that they had a group of people they had done experimenting on. And one of them was also called The Man. And the man is chasing Chase and trying to bring her in, and she's on the run. And that's pretty much the story,
Mhm.
except that it examines toxic superheroes, which were, really popular in the early 90s, and there's still a good many of them around. And it also examines the fact that Chase wants to be in control of her own life, and not be weaponized by the government.
So, what inspired uh, this story?
Well, I'd like to say there was some sort of great social need for me to do this, but the truth is that I ran Insight Studios for 37 years, I think it was. And the guy right across the hall in his own studio was Mark Hempel, and we had already collaborated on being interplanetary spy books for Bantam Books, and we had done Mars together and Johnny Quest together and Blood of the Innocent together, and I had my fill of collaborating with Mark for a while. I mean, I love the guy, he's a good guy, incredibly talented, but I wanted to strike out and do some things on my own. And I did. I went off and I did the Black Hood and Tarzan, and suddenly I realized one day that Mark was just coming in every day and sitting alone in his studio and didn't seem to be getting any paychecks. So I talked to him and found out that yes, he had gone a long time between work because he didn't really know how to go out and find it. So I started thinking in terms of how we could work together without getting on in each other's hair. And
Hmm.
so I took a writing day at home, took a hike in the woods, climbed a mountain, and when I got to the top of the mountain, I thought BREATHTAKER. The name just came to me. And by the time I came back down the mountain, I had the story worked out. I went back to the studio and pitched it to Mark, and he was in. And so we developed a proposal. It took us probably, I don't know, 2 or 3 months to put the proposal together with sample pages. I packed it up, shipped it to Mike Gold at DC Comics, 8 p.m. one night via FedEx, and the next morning at 10 a.m. he called and said, "Let's do
Hmm.
this."
So, um, how did you go about developing the characters in the story?
Um, well, Mark Hempel had been working on a series of erotic paintings. They were kind of like a combination of science fiction and eroticism, and I wanted to try to capture that feel in the story, although it ended up being a lot more grounded in reality than science fiction. Um, and the characters, yeah, I don't know. I think a lot of authors run into this, but when I write, there's probably a good couple days when I first start writing a story where all I've got in my head is a plot and some names of characters. And because it's comics, they're usually cute names. So I'll write, and it doesn't feel natural. It's like carving wood and nothing's coming out. And then at some point, I start getting whispers of a voice, and before I know it, the characters are talking to me, and if I can just hear their voice talking, I'll put them in a conversation with each other, and as they start talking back and forth, they just kind of take over, and that's usually when I throw the plot out, and I suddenly realize, oh, this is what the story is about.
Hmm.
I just did this. I'm glad you asked the question because if you had asked this question a month ago, I wouldn't have been able to think through as clearly on it. But I just did a new Frankenstein mobster text story, prose story, for a new book that's coming out, and it had been almost 20 years since I had written a Frankenstein mobster story. So it was the same kind of struggle. I sat there for like 3 days, just come on, where are you? Where's my character? And then all of a sudden he started talking to me again, and in the course of 2.5 days, the story just like poured out of it. And
Hmm.
this was pretty much it. I actually wrote a short story format for Mark, and this is how we ended up collaborating on Breathtaker. So I would, for each of the 4 books, I would write a long short story and just hand it off to him, and he would take it from there and break it down sequentially and tell the story visually. And then once he was done doing that, I would dialogue it.
So, looking back on the book as a whole, is there anything that you wish you had changed or done differently?
Uh, Geez, not really. It's pretty much the. You could probably ask me that about a number of my creations, and I might have a more interesting answer. But I think for this one, I'm going to say it came out damn near perfect. we were just so fortunate. It was the right time, the right place. We were the right people. DC Comics backed us to the hilt, and then when it came out, it just sold like wildfire, and it was a blessed sort of experience from beginning to the end. And it's kind of um, uh, impressive even to me at this point. We've had to go through and reread it. I just did I did a new story with Mark for the collection, and it's the first time we've collaborated, I think, this century. um, and looking back at that original story, it doesn't read old. I mean, the one thing is there's only one person in that story that has a cell phone, but otherwise, it reads like a modern story. And I'm not quite sure how we managed to pull that off, but we did. Yeah.
Now, as you were writing it, did you was there a particular character that you became attached to, or found it easier than others to write? Write?
Um, well, Chase is the point of view character. So once I got inside of her head, it was pretty easy to write it. I mean, comics take a lot of work to create them, right? So, when we pitched this story, I had already essentially written it. And that's what, probably 1980, late 1987, and the book comes out in 90. So it took us 14 months just to negotiate the contract because our lawyer worked with Lillian Laserson up at DC Comics, and they put together the first creator-owned contract for DC Comics. But it took them 14 months to hammer that out. So, I'm off doing other projects, and then one day they say, "Oh, we have a deal." I actually remember I called Mike Gold and I said, "We're ready to get started." And he said, "Oh my God, we're actually doing this?" I mean, because 14 months had gone by and he hadn't heard a word.
Right.
So by the time we finished doing the art and the story for this thing, I had written the story almost 3 years earlier. So it's a funny process. I guess motion pictures are similar, right? You pitch the thing over and over again, and you finally make the movie, and it comes out 6 years later. So, yeah, so. And then you have to act like, yeah, I just did this. Yeah. In this case, we did it 35 years ago. We're getting ready to have this big event at the Baltimore Comic Con coming up in the middle of October, I think 17th through 19th, something like that. And the Norman Rockwell Museum has held two shows of Breathtaker original artwork over the last number of years. And it's been touring around, and the tour is now going to be at the Baltimore Comic Con. And so Mark Hempel and I just received the shipment of artwork that we're going to be mounting at the show at the convention. And we were going through these originals, and since it's been touring around, we haven't seen these originals in probably 8 years.
Mhm.
And this was just yesterday. We were doing this, and we were both talking to each other about how we could still remember every brushstroke and every line drawn, and it did not seem like 30 years, 35 years had gone by at all. That it's, it's we're imprinted on this book.
So, I believe I heard you say that you worked as an art director when you were in college.
Yes. Hmm.
How
Yeah,
did
for the
how,
Department
how,
of Culture and Commerce.
yeah, how did how did that experience help you in your comic book writing career and such?
Well, I've worn a lot of hats, and so I started a studio. We had as many as 18 people working there at one time. We did production work for the publishing industry, comics, book publishing. I invented a color separation system that was used by all the majors for over a dozen years. Um, uh, it's really come in handy these days, being my own publisher on some private projects. I mean, I mentioned Nucleus before, and last
Mhm.
year I published the new issue of Nucleus,
Okay.
which is a 40-year gap between issue number 9 and issue number 10. But we got it out. And I can do these things myself. You know, I contracted for a custom box, and I contracted printers all over the country for the different cute things, you know, posters and books and
Mhm.
trading cards and stuff. So I know all this stuff. I worked as a printer, I've worked as an art director, I've been an editor, I've run a studio, I've been a publisher. Um, it all comes in handy. I've written for television. I've designed for motion pictures. In fact, much of my income from the last 15 or so years has been working for network television, doing on-air artwork. So, you
So, well, let's talk about your recent stuff that you're doing. Tell us a little bit about more about that.
well, this past summer has probably been one of the busiest times of my career. Between preparing for the launch of BREATHTAKER and making sure it was right. Um, I was also illustrating not one, not two, not three, but four, four separate books. There's a new high-end, fully illustrated, classy edition of the Pack series by Edgar Rice Burroughs coming out from ERB Books. And I did the cover for The Lamb That Time Forgot. And I did 10 illustrations that are spread over the total of the three books in the series. It'll be a box set. It comes with posters and all sorts of extras that, you know, I'm not exactly sure what's going to be in this box, but the previous one they've done is included printing plates and coins and trading cards and stand-ups and all sorts of stuff. So, and then I'm also illustrating a new book by Jeff Foxson, who I previously collaborated with on our Dr. Cthulhu series. I'm committed for 10 illustrations, and I've done 9. And if I don't get the 10th one done in the next couple of days, I'm going to miss my deadline. But so that's a lot of that. I did right before that. I did the theatrical release poster for Zack Snyder's Rebel Moon movie, and while my poster was being used in the theaters, that movie was the #1 movie in the world. So, woohoo! um, and let's see, I've worked on Two Broke Girls and The Millers. And, a lot of TV shows you'd probably recognize.
So, if you have a either you're looking as a writer and a artist, do you have one that you tend to favor more, or one you
That's a
find
good question.
more difficult?
Yeah, that's a good question. Um, so it's it, it's like your children. You don't want to have a favorite, right? But
I only have
the
one,
truth,
so
you only have one kid.
yeah.
Yeah, well then you're allowed to have a favorite. That's cool. I've got 2 cats, and I make sure they both know I love them. You know. Uh, so I think it was the late '90s. Um, I was brought on board to pull together a writing staff for a TV series. And I ended up writing 4 episodes for this animated show called Troll Tales, which aired on HBO. And So I wrote those 4 episodes, and I worked very closely with the story editor. And when I was done, we had really, gotten in a groove together. And she asked me if I would want to go to her next gig with her. And I said, yeah, absolutely. What's it going to be? And she says, well, we're reviving the Munsters. And I said, oh, okay, that sounds cool. And she says, all right, well, give me a call in the fall and I'll assign you some scripts. And I said, okay. And hung up. And I, went to a comic convention and ran into a couple editors. They asked me to do some work, and I did it. And I got involved in doing a series, and then I did another series, and then I wrote some more things, and I illustrated a couple books. And then about 8 years later, about 3 in the morning, I woke up and went, I didn't call her. And that's when I realized I think comics probably means more to me than TV.
Mhm.
Yeah. Once I had comics in my sight, I had the blinders on it, and just nothing else penetrated.
Now, is there a character that maybe you haven't worked on that you would really like to maybe tell a story about?
Um, yeah, so I feel really fortunate in a way. I've got to work on Tarzan, which is probably my seminal character. I grew up in a corner of the Great Dismal Swamp and built treehouse after treehouse when I was a kid. So I really identified with Tarzan. I got to, I've illustrated The Spider, which I really liked a lot. And I've illustrated stories. I mean, I'm doing all the book covers for the Robert E. Howard books now. I've done like 13, 14 of the covers, and I've still got about 10 to go out of everything he ever wrote on the Ultimate series of books from the Robert E. Howard Foundation. Um, I mean, I've been really fortunate. I've been able to work on the things I really love. As far as comics go, I got to do Doctor Strange and the Flash. Um, I probably was a little jealous of Mark Hempel because he got to do Spider-Man and I didn't. um, but yeah, the thing of it is, and I realized this a long time ago, even while I was still a kid, is that it wasn't so much the characters as it was the creative team that really hooked me. And as long as they were in charge of that character, it was magic. And when they left, it would fall flat, right? So um, you give me any character, and I think I could probably turn it into magic. But you know, it's you got to have that investment. And
Mhm.
and and I think, and I know a lot of creators are like this. We 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 tend to be very protective of our characters because you forge a relationship with them, and it's like splitting up when you have to be pulled off the character. So it's it can be painful to leave a character once you've gotten involved with
Looking back on your career, how you feel the industry itself has changed, and is it for the better or for the worse?
them. Well, it certainly has changed. Um, yeah, when I came into the industry, it was right about the time when everything was collapsing in the late 70s. That was during the time when Charlton went out of business and the great DC implosion where they canceled like 70 books overnight and stuff, which is why I ended up doing things like Gasm and heavy metal rather than go right into working for the comic companies. My first meeting with uh, uh, John Romita up at Marvel, Stan Lee had seen my portfolio in college and told me to come to work at Marvel. And so I showed up, 4 months later, and all John could tell me was, I can't find work for guys who've been in this industry for 30 years. I don't feel right trying to give you anything. So, you know, So that's where I started. And then I went through the black and white boom where, the Teenage Ninja Mutant Turtles launched 1,000 comic books. And that was a very exciting time. And if there was any time in comics that I've seen, that was probably the most exciting time because it was a it was the Wild West. Anything could go. Nobody had a formula. Nobody knew what would work, and there's some amazing comics that came out during that period. But there's still a lot of really amazing stuff going on today, and the hardest thing we have today is making sure the comics get into the hands of the customers. I think the creative end is still very fruitful, but making sure the stores survive and the distribution network is running smoothly is a real challenge, I think.
Now, did you follow any current creators or artists?
Um, I don't know if I'm that religious about following anybody particularly. There are some exciting creators like Jesse Longeran. I think he does amazing work. Um, uh, I just got back from the Small Press Expo where I picked up a whole stack of stuff. And if you ask me in a couple weeks after I work through the stack, I'll give you a review. But that show is so amazing because there are so many just vibrating with excitement that their new comic book is out. And I don't see that so much at a regular comic book convention.
Mhm.
People have a certain armor of cynicism, I think, at a regular comic book convention when they're sitting behind the table. It's like, my new book. I hope you enjoy my new book. Whereas at SPX, it's like, I did a new book. Here's my new book. And that's how it was when I first got into the industry, and that's kind of the magic I keep wanting to try to hang on to myself.
What do you know now as a veteran of the industry that you wish you knew early on in your career?
Hmm. Um, I wish that I had the early ability to be more social. If anything, we've become more isolated, I think, um, uh, as individuals, creators. Um, and I ran into this a lot when I started out, and especially when I got the studio going and guys would come in and I'd try to find work for them, is that we tend to be, as creators, pretty shy people, I think, ultimately. We're really introverts into the stories and not focused on other people so much. And yet, I think the industry works best when everybody is communicating and talking to each other. And these days, I think that only really happens at comic book conventions where we can socialize a bit. Back in the day, every couple of weeks I was in the offices up in New York and for all the different publishers, and we knew everybody by face and went out to dinner together. And I mean, there was a lot of interaction and cross pollination of ideas that way that could happen spontaneously. Um, and I don't think I did it nearly enough. Like I said, I did it every couple of weeks. I should have done it every week.
Now, how did Breathtaker end up at Titan?
Well, so I had been setting up at San Diego for ever, going all the way back to the mid '80s, and Nick Landau and I had known each other for a long time, and we would see each other every year and talk and catch up. And he was in my booth. Somehow he got inside my booth. And we got to talking about different stuff, and he asked me what my new projects were. And we had at that time an active option on our Blood of the Innocent series, the Dracula versus Jack the Ripper series. Breck Eisner, Michael Eisner's son, was attached to direct, a feature film of it, and we were looking for a publisher to bring the book back out. And Nick, was asking me what book I would like to get out, and I said Blood of the Innocent, and he said, "Well, that sounds good. When's the movie coming out?" And I said, "Well, I don't know yet." And he said, "Well, what do we got we can do right now?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. Nothing's happening for the other ones. I don't have any TV shows or movies or anything that would make it, really tasty." And he said, "No, no, no. What about Breathtaker? I always loved that book." And I said, "Well, that's kind of the jewel in our crown." And he said, "Well, I could do it right." And so, he convinced me over the course of about an hour that he could do a good job with it. And that's how I got going. And I think that was probably 12 years ago. Here it is, just like that. every time we've inched up to have the book released, there's been some kind of world or industry disaster. In 2019, the book was literally on press, about to start printing, when I talked to Nick and I said, I've got a feeling Diamond's going to pull the plug. And he said, "Yeah, let me check into that." And he called back and he said, "Yeah, what do you think about the idea of not publishing the book this year?" So we made a good call there, because if we had published that book, it would have just sat in a warehouse for years.
Now, I think I heard you say that you did a new short story for
It's
this.
a full length story, actually. We did an
Okay.
entire issue of Make Way for the Man. So in the context of the Breathtaker comic book, the story is that the man is a very popular media figure, in addition to being an agent of the NSA. So he has his own TV show, his own line of comic books, and his own toy line, and I'm sure his own, aftershave lotion, and ties with TM on it. So in the context of the story, at one point while he's on a train, a little boy walks up to him and asks him to sign his copy of the Man comic book number 137, and he does. You know, but people have been getting in touch with us about this ever since, saying, "When are you going to actually do a comic book about the Man?" And so we figured for this we would do issue number 138 of the Man. And so Mark and I did. This is it. This is the first and maybe the last collaboration we'll do this century. We'll have to wait till next century. Do one every century. But yeah, we did a full comic book. We did a new cover, did a full length story, and we even did a fake Hostess Twinkies ad in the back.
That's going to be my next question. Was it any plans, or would you like to revisit that world of Breathtaker?
Oh, I'd be open to it, but Mark is pretty much kind of retired at this point. So, it took him over a year and a half to ink one issue of a comic book.
Mhm.
And the original plan was he was going to pencil it too, but I ended up penciling it. So it's just not practical. I mean, if we did anything, it would just take way too long.
Hmm.
So, and the bottom line is, I don't want to do it without it. I mean,
Right.
it's too much of a collaboration. So,
Well, is
which,
there anything else?
by the way, as collaborators, it's interesting because he's very talented in many different areas too. So, I mean, our original collaboration was I wrote it, Mark penciled and drew it, and I painted it. But when we got back together again to do this new story, I wrote it, then I penciled it, Mark inked it, I lettered it, and did the color work. But for the Hostess parody, the Hostess Twinkie ad parody with the Man, Mark is really probably one of the funniest people I know. And he wrote the script for that Hostess Twinkie bit. So he wrote it, I penciled it, and he inked it. So we're always, when we did Mars, people we would just say by Mark Wheatley and Mark Hempel. People are always like, who did what? Well, we were switching back and forth all the time.
So, is there anything else about Breathtaker or your career that you'd like to tell people about?
Well, if you're going to be in the neighborhood of the Baltimore Comic Con coming up in just a couple weeks, um, I hope you'll stop by and say hi because we're going to have an extensive show of original artwork by the two of us from Breathtaker from the touring show by the Norman Rockwell Museum. We're going to have the limited edition of, here, I'll show you. We have the Man comic book, which only 300 copies exist. They're signed, limited editions. They will only be available from us there. Um, we will have copies of Breathtaker, reflecting good, and get a good blink. And with the new introduction by Walt Simonson. And Walt's going to be on the premiere panel with us, along with Mike Gold and Kathy Mix. So the entire original editorial team will be back together again. So it should be pretty cool. And hopefully everybody will have a chance to get in on it. We only have a limited number of the signed editions of Breathtaker available, so you got to get in early for those. And if you can't get to the convention, hopefully your local comic shop will be able to get it for you. And I guess that's it.
All right, and are you on social media, or where can
I am.
people find out more about you?
You can find me on Facebook. Wheatley Marks is the tagline for my fan page. And I'm also on Blue Sky. Um, and I'm on LinkedIn. And I think that's it. My honestly, my assistant makes sure I have a presence on the internet. I spend all my
Mhm.
time writing and drawing, and just drop in for an hour a day or something. So,
And one final question, I guess, is what advice would you have for aspiring writers or comic book creators?
hmm, I don't think you can go wrong creating your own material. It's great to want to be the next artist on Batman or the next writer on Batman or Spider Man or Aquaman or whoever. Um, but all you're doing is perpetrating more money for Disney and Warner's, and you want to build your own career, and and they can cancel you at any time and send you walking. I've had good experiences working for all those guys, but bottom line is they're looking out for themselves. They're not looking out for you. So if you're creating your own characters and getting them out there, there's never been a better time in the world to be able to get your own work out. Uh, the internet offers instant exposure. So web comics are the way to go. Make sure you're keeping your own titles and make sure you protect your rights. Uh, Copyright everything, trademark everything, document how you created it.
Mhm.
Um, but you can't go wrong with your own characters and your own material.
All right. Well, I want to thank you for taking the time this evening to chat with us. And you're more than welcome back anytime if you have anything you'd like to promote.
That'd be great. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Um, yeah, yeah. And people should definitely check out the collected edition of Breathtaker. And
We only got
if you're
80
looking
pages of new material.
at as for us, the show will be back next Wednesday. We'll be talking to Dave Dwanch. And until that time, the world, these days can be a pretty crappy place, but it doesn't have to be. Do something nice for somebody. Support your local comic shop. Support your local businesses. Just don't be a dick.